Hello, my name is Martin Lipscomb, and in this nursing conversation, I'm joined by Professor Michael Traynor. Michael works at Middlesex University, London, England. He's co-founder of and Professor for Nursing Policy at the Centre for Critical Research in Nursing and Midwifery, which can be found online at critresnurse.org. His books include Nursing in Context, Policy, Politics, Profession, Stories of Resilience in Nursing, Critical Resilience for Nurses, and Managerialism and Nursing Beyond Oppression and Profession. He's co-author of the book Understanding Sociology in Nursing, and he's contributed to many more, including mine. A Google Scholar search of his publications will leave most people feeling distinctly inadequate, and his scholarly outputs are, in layman's terms, legion. Michael, thank you for joining me here today. Now, in a short review piece for the Journal of Research in Nursing in 2016, volume 21, issue 7, you noted that, and here I quote, "Researchers in practice disciplines, by which you mean nursing, pursue work of intellectual challenge rather than answering the basic questions that service managers and practitioners are said to be asking." And I take it from this that, in your opinion, nursing researchers are not addressing the questions that practitioners need answers to, or if that's too declamatory, perhaps they don't address those questions often enough. Further, I also note that together with Niels Buss, in your 2016 paper in volume 166 of Social Science and Medicine titled Professional Identity in Nursing, you suggested something was seriously awry with nursing socialization. So more specifically, here you argued that idealism gives way to disillusion in education, and idealistic talk covers, in some respects, to conceal anxiety. And similarly, critical themes appear, if I recall, in your book, Nursing in Context. So let me ask you, what, if any, link might be made between, on the one hand, the idea that nurse researchers are not focused on the questions that matter to clinicians, and by contrast, problems around the socialization of pre-registration or pre-licensed nurses? Should we make connections between the disillusionment of clinicians, failings in professional enculturation, and the creation and take-up or not of nursing research findings? What do you think?
Thanks, Martin, for asking me to do this and for asking this question. It's kind of it's stimulated me to kind of think about this stuff, and I've got a kind of some ideas here which I'll kind of rehearse. I suppose the first thing I'd want to answer, almost like to any question about nursing, is to say that nursing is hugely varied. So the motivation and the identity of the people that work in the profession, as well as nursing work and research in nursing, are all hugely varied. And perhaps more so than in medicine or in those other occupations that nursing is often compared with, like social work and teaching. And it could be that sometimes people, nurses, working in one particular field or orientation, mistake the part for the whole in a kind of metonymy, or, as my autocorrect wants me to say, a kind of metronome. So looking just at research in nursing for a moment, we have research broadly in a biomedical model. It focuses on clinical questions, uses methods and designs associated with biomedicine, like clinical trials. And it has the models of funding and perhaps the culture of biomedical research. There might be largish, well-funded centres, maybe strong partnerships with medical researchers and centres. That's kind of one field of research in nursing. And this, I think, shades into research that still has a strong focus on patient outcomes and patient experience and how the two might be linked, but maybe uses mixed methods or qualitative methods to investigate these topics. So this research might take place on the fringes of large funded clinical trials, or it may not. And some of the researchers involved in this work may use it as these studies as the basis for their PhD work. So those are two things. Then I think we have another field of work, research work, that you might call endogenous, or rather more introspective. This research field, I think, tends to be informed by concepts and theories from the social sciences and humanities. So the research topic may be patient, client focused, or it might be the professional client interactions, or it could be on features of the nursing workforce or nursing work itself. I'd say this is very clearly applied research. And I use that term both in its ordinary sense and in a slightly derogatory way. And I can come back to that later because I don't want to lose my thread. In fact, I've already lost it. Okay, back to socialization in nursing. The concept of the disillusioned idealist is not mine, of course. It has been the staple of research into nursing and medicine and probably other service type professions for many decades. I think it was Jill Mabon who brought it into clear sight in nursing in her longitudinal study of students becoming qualified nurses in the early 2000s. The thing is that what you might call disillusion might not really be something regretful, if that's the right word. I had this next idea stuck at the end of the page, but I want to slot it in now. So one characteristic of nursing research is that by and large, the researchers are nurses. I wanted to say ex-nurses, some are. And that's, I think, entirely different to medical sociology, for example, though probably not that different to clinical medical research. So nurse researchers, I think, tend to have a vested interest, sometimes uncritically, sometimes sitting alongside a more critical approach. They have a vested interest in the profession and its value. So when Jill and others investigate and write about crushed idealists, their language is saturated with their position. No, she is not uncritical, but it is the language of regret. Now that's in contrast to another favorite piece of research of mine, the book Beyond Caring by Daniel Chambliss. As far as I know, he's someone that has no link with the nursing profession. He did a large ethnographic study in hospitals in the United States. And he is fascinated by the way that practicing nurses, the nurses that he studied, have learnt to cope with the trauma of the job. And I think because he is fascinated rather than pained, he finds out more. If you're a nurse, he says, you have to routinize the traumatic. And from my memory of his book, he doesn't differentiate between relatively good or bad ways of doing that. So to try and stick with your question, is there any evidence that research findings might be able to influence this professional socialization?
Yeah.
My first reaction is that the concerns of researchers in nursing and the concerns of most student nurses and newly qualified nurses, and probably hard-pressed nurse managers, exist in parallel universes. The only exception, of course, is my work.
Of course.
If we could find a way to drug every student nurse and every nurse tutor and somehow compel them to read my books on resilience, then they'd walk into practice or talk about practice with a sophistication that would temper any idealism and give them an understanding of the forces at work in healthcare and in the profession that make doing the job feel so difficult.
Okay, but if we can't drug all of the nurses and all of the nurse educators, what follows on then?
Okay, let me kind of continue in response to that, because that's what I'm next to. So I noticed that when I wrote back in 2016, as you quoted, researchers in practice disciplines such as nursing pursue work of intellectual challenge rather than answering the basic questions that service managers and practitioners are said to be asking. And notice I did, thankfully, insert a note of skepticism, writing the questions that those actually quite different groups are said to be asking. So who knows whether managers and practitioners are hungry for research findings, if only the researchers just asked the questions they wanted answers to. My guess would be that there is very little room in the NHS here in the UK for that kind of basic curiosity in decision making about how to dress this wound or how to staff this particular unit. I imagine that the workplace and healthcare organizations are run on policies, protocols, guidelines, standards, and the need to report to various bodies that might well have taken the place of the journal club of keen nurses discussing how they could implement some recent findings about wound care. I'm sure that the work of nurses doing clinical trials does somehow feed into policies and practice, but I think it would be wrong to think that nurses are crying out even for that kind of research. So you asked something, Martin, and I've forgotten what it is already.
Okay, so the disillusionment that is spoken about by many people across a great deal of literature may not be that thing at all. It could be a coming to a greater understanding of the reality of nursing rather than an ideal which runs beyond that reality or is disengaged from that reality. And the work that researchers do, because nurse researchers are nurses, is filtered through their ideas of what the profession should be achieving, so the values that they hold run through their research in the way that perhaps a sociologist going to medicine wouldn't presume. So there's a place here for some hermeneutic thinking and hermeneutic understanding about the way in which we are situated and make sense of the world, not as observers looking in, but as part of the thing being observed. And perhaps that's what we're not recognizing. And on top of that, you layer another set of ideas, which is that given how busy the world is, how busy nursing and clinical practice is, the idea that the proponents of evidence-based practice have, and perhaps many researchers, nurse researchers hoping their products will be taken up, runs into the ground when actually clinicians and managers are so busy doing their job that it's unrealistic perhaps even to expect that they would want to engage with those products. Is that what you're saying, or have I just horribly mutilated your words?
No, the first bit is yes. The second bit is, I think, I don't know for sure, it's my impression that research, whether it's clinical medical research or nursing research, I imagine that it does influence practice and the way practice is organized, but not in a kind of direct way, in a much more indirect, bureaucratized way, so that nurses don't need to, on the whole, don't need to be engaging with research for it to be influencing their practice. And so it might be a bit of a fiction to think that they're all kind of really just waiting for us all to ask the right questions. Then they'll eagerly, I suspect that isn't true.
Okay. Certainly in the UK, all undergraduate nursing students are subjected to a module which will be called something like evidence-based practice. And they'll be introduced there to the grounding ideas about evidence-based practice. And often those modules take the form of essentially an introduction to methods and methodology. My understanding from having spoken to people at a number of UK universities, but also my own practice as an educator, is that the introduction, certainly to undergraduates and possibly postgraduates as well, to evidence-based practice and research, focuses entirely on methods and methodology, on the location and appraisal of research. But what we don't tend to do is give enough attention to the ways in which research is or isn't taken up, the barriers and enablements to evidence use. I'm not too sure why that is, but is that your feeling as well?
Yes, probably. I mean, from those types of module,
Yeah.
what would be really great outcome would be to instill a kind of skepticism into everybody that goes through the module, so that when they get out to practice, or even just in daily life in a way, that it becomes a bit of a habit to not take things at face value, to kind of doubt things, be wondering about causes for stuff. You know, that would be much more useful than being able to define different research designs.
Okay, I think we agree. When you talk about skepticism, you're talking there about academic skepticism, aren't you? The ability to step back and be critically reflective, for want of a better phrase, on what's occurring around you, your own practice, and the reasons you have for practice.
Yeah, I don't know. We don't have to have the word academic in that. I think, you know, a kind of a skepticism and a kind of about your practice, about how things are organized, why are things like this, you know, rather than just not noticing, rather than just accepting, oh, this is how things are, you know.
Okay, I think I was just trying to differentiate critical skepticism from a stronger form of skepticism, which can lead us very quickly into dark places.
I don't know, maybe sometimes you need to kind of get a glimpse of what the dark places look like. I don't know.
Okay, so to round out, what do you think, as nurse educators, introducing students to ideas around research, evidence-based practice, we should be thinking about? Where do we need to go?
Well, as I said, I think teaching concepts, but also teaching in a way that maintains that sort of value in skepticism, if that's the right word, or criticality maybe, I don't know.
Okay.
So to teach research methods with a kind of emphasis on orthodoxy would kind of defeat that, because it would be kind of contradictory, saying we need to always be open-minded and questioning, but actually when I'm teaching you methods, this is how it is, so you just, you know, so to teach, you know, even methods, even like rigor and all these kind of things, to teach them in a kind of questioning way. So, well, this is what people say rigor is, you know, there's other ways of looking at it. What might that talk be trying to achieve, you know, to have a kind of consistency rather than just, maybe it comes naturally, I don't know, this sort of, or, you know, you just need to remember, understand, and then you'll pass the module.
I would like ideally to move away from teaching or focusing so strongly on methods and methodologies, on the location and appraisal. I'd like ideally in evidence-based practice, but also in, I'm thinking here of undergraduate dissertations, much more to a focus on problem identification and the use value of some of the evidence which is available. Whereas I feel sometimes our focus is too much on methods and methodologies.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's stop there. That was really interesting. Thank you very much, Michael. And thank you for your time today.
It's an absolute pleasure to be thinking about this kind of stuff.
Thank you.